On the outskirts of a town resembling many others, there stood a small house. It was modest but well kept. It consisted of just a couple of rooms, a veranda, and a small kitchen. Next to the house was a well-maintained plot of land and a small shed for storing various tools. All of this had been inherited by Katerina from her mother, who passed away several years ago. The woman had raised her daughter alone and refused to answer any questions about her father. When they learned about the girl's serious illness, it was already too late to provide any help. The illness progressed rapidly, and the girl died in the hospital within a week. Since then, Katerina had been living alone, despite her former classmates already having families, and many even having more than one child. She wasn't introverted or reclusive, and she had met young men on several occasions, but those encounters quickly turned into fleeting romances, and the suitors vanished. Colleagues at work and acquaintances whispered behind her back, calling her a failure, incapable of starting a family. It seemed like she was ready to give up on her personal life, but soon she abandoned that idea. On that day, the weather was bitterly cold, and it had been a tough day at work. As soon as Katerina boarded the bus she took every day to get home, she fell asleep instantly. And on that day, her neighbor, who lived a couple of houses down, woke her up. Thanks to her, Katerina didn't miss her stop, which she was no longer able to reach on her own. Thanking the woman, Katerina bundled up in her scarf and hurried home. The road led through a small park, and at the entrance, she saw a tall, poorly dressed young man. He smiled at her, as if apologizing, and settled on one of the benches, clearly preparing to spend the night there. Katerina managed to get a good look at him. He wore a jacket completely unsuited for the season, trying to shield himself from the freezing weather. His hands were dirty, and his jeans were torn and heavily worn. The shoes looked even worse. The sneakers were falling apart, and one of them was even tied with a piece of rope to prevent the sole from coming off. The young man curled up into a ball and settled in for the night. For the rest of the way home, Katerina could only think about that poor soul. She couldn't fathom how he would survive until morning in such cold. Throughout the journey, she imagined horrifying scenes of the young man dying in the park. Thoughts raced through her mind for almost an hour until she snapped out of it. Immediately, she started searching for something warm for the stranger. However, since there had never been any men's clothing in the house, she only managed to find a pair of larger gloves and a warm scarf knitted by her mother. Without even having breakfast and grabbing a bag with the items, she hurried to the park. However, there was no one on the bench where the stranger had been yesterday. Katerina assumed that, perhaps, the poor guy had gone in the opposite direction, seeking shelter in the entryways of the nearby streets. At least, she desperately wanted to believe that he was somewhere warm right now, and they would meet again. Katerina was always known for her compassion, and even at work, she was nicknamed the Helping Hand. She was always ready to assist anyone if they needed to move or needed help with something. People flocked to her for assistance. But this time, her empathetic nature wouldn't let her rest. Katerina eagerly awaited the end of the workday, hoping to meet the young man again. She was nervous and couldn't sit still, anticipating the evening. Katerina hurried to the cherished park, as if going on a date. She couldn't understand why she felt such a strong desire to help the poor guy she had met yesterday. Her heart was ready to leap out of her chest, and thoughts of him sent shivers down her spine. When Katerina approached the bench where they had met yesterday, she discovered that the young man was still there. When he saw her, he smiled but immediately looked away, as if embarrassed by his appearance. However, Katerina sensed that there was something special about him, and she felt her heart beating even faster, with a tremor running through her body. "Here, please take this," she said, extending the bag to him. "It's all I can offer, gloves and a scarf. It will keep you warmer." The young man looked up at her, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. When he spoke, Katerina realized that she would love to hear that voice for the rest of her life. It was warm and captivating. "Thank you so much. You're the only one who wanted to help me," I'm very grateful. But all I can do in return is walk you home, he said, as if apologizing. Katerina gladly agreed. She found this young man very pleasant, and they set off along the pathways, getting to know each other along the way. By the time they reached Katerina's home, they were already conversing throughout the walk. Friends. He hadn't revealed why he ended up on the streets, and Katerina decided not to broach the topic he avoided. When they reached the gate, Katerina offered, "Come inside. It's warmer in the house, and we can talk more." He hesitated for a moment, but then smiled and accepted her invitation. And that's how their unexpected encounter turned into the beginning of a new chapter in both of their lives. "I have a casserole and delicious mint tea. Would you like to come in?" she added shyly, but Victor politely declined, saying, "I love casserole, but I feel awkward. Besides, I think you're tired from work, but another time, I'll definitely agree." Since then, they met almost every day on the cherished bench. It seemed like everything was happening by chance, but in reality, both of them were already looking forward to these meetings. The local residents who lived nearby and saw the strange couple every day shrugged their shoulders, expressing their disapproval. The slender and very neat girl of short stature and the nearly 2-meter tall guy who looked more like a homeless person made many people look at them with confusion. But they felt good together, and in those moments, they didn't care what others thought. Holding hands, they talked and laughed as if there was no one else in the world. One day, as this remarkable couple passed by a trash bin at the park's exit, they heard a whimper, plaintive and very faint. The young people stopped and listened in surprise, realizing that the sound was coming from a shoebox lying on the ground. They opened the lid and stared at the teary eyes of a small black puppy. "Oh, little one, who abandoned you here? Poor thing, come with us," said Katerina, ready to burst into tears herself. They wrapped the puppy, whom they immediately named Chernish, in the scarf given by Katerina to Victor, and hurried home. This time, they were so engrossed in taking care of their new ward that they didn't even notice they ended up in Katerina's house. They spent entire evenings fussing over the poor puppy. When Chernish was fed, bathed, and contentedly snoozing on the couch prepared by Katerina, they sat for a long time, embracing each other. It was their first night together, and Victor agreed to stay over at Katerina's. Both were shy and used the excuse of taking care of the puppy, but it was just a reason not to be separated again. They felt so good together that night almost passed without sleep. Happily, they made plans for their future, dreaming of living in this house and raising at least 3 children. When Victor mentioned it, Katerina burst into laughter, saying, "Where will we fit them all?" But her beloved, with a serious expression, said that it would be his responsibility as the head of the family. Smiling blissfully, Katerina fell asleep on Victor's shoulder, feeling that this man would never let her down or leave her. They couldn't imagine life without each other anymore. The next morning, Victor surprised Katerina by proposing. Instead of a ring, he playfully put a handmade decoration from a candy wrapper on her finger. At first, the girl was taken aback, but then she nestled into his chest and whispered, "Of course, I agree. I fell in love with you right away." She didn't care about his status. The most important thing was to have him by her side. While preparing breakfast for her beloved that morning, she happily chatted away, and in the kitchen she said, "But why do we need a grand and solemn celebration? We don't have money, and we don't need it. I'll prepare a dinner you've never seen in your life. Let's sign the papers and celebrate together, you, me, and Chernish." She was ready for anything as long as she could wake up and fall asleep with her beloved every day. But Victor, kissing Katerina on the cheek, said, "Sweetheart, don't worry about anything," leaving the preparation of the festive table to me. His mysterious smile indicated that he had a surprise for his bride. Katerina wasn't surprised by anything. After all, even their meetings had been an amazing thing. She thought that Victor simply wanted to take care of the dinner himself, and playfully smiling, agreed. The whole month before the wedding, all of Katerina's acquaintances and colleagues tried to dissuade her. They couldn't understand how she could agree to marry a regular homeless man, and they not only didn't speak kindly of him, but also showered him with insults. But Katerina welcomed her husband's family and his response with a happy smile. She didn't care at all what others thought because she was truly in love for the first time in her life. The girl couldn't hide her surprise when her newlywed husband arrived at the registry office in a nice car and looked completely different. He was clean-shaven and dressed impeccably. Everyone who came to the celebration was absolutely astonished, but it was just after the registration. He invited everyone who came to celebrate them, their friends and colleagues, to a festive evening at one of the city's restaurants. Katerina didn't know what to expect next. In the restaurant, they were greeted by beautifully set tables and a charming host. The height of the evening, the newlywed husband approached the microphone and said, "Today, I am an incredibly happy person, or rather, now I am married to the kindest and most honest girl in the whole city. All this time, everyone judged and discouraged you from marrying a homeless man, but she saw a person in me. After all, are money and external glamour more important than soul and heart?" It turned out he was a very wealthy businessman. His parents, who died in a car accident, had left him a company and a considerable fortune. And he, having graduated from the university's economics faculty, was not a barrier for him since he easily managed his father's business. Every day, he would go to work in his own car, and one day he saw Katerina when she was crossing the road right by that same park. The girl appeared fragile and divine to him, and he decided to get to know her no matter what. However, knowing that many girls were attracted to his wealth, he decided to test how she would react to a simple and poor guy. After confirming that she walked home from work through the park at approximately the same time every day, he decided to play a little game with her and, at the same time, test her selflessness in relationships. All his previous romances quickly ended as soon as the girls started to ask him for money. Once they found out about his wealth, they immediately requested gifts and expensive trips. Victor decided that in order to avoid past mistakes, he needed to test the girl he liked to see how she would treat him as a normal, or even unusual, very poor person in need of assistance. And he was not mistaken. He didn't regret it. He realized that Katerina was exactly the person who was willing to be by his side, even in poverty. Immediately after the wedding, Victor moved his wife and faithful Chernish to his enormous house. Katerina easily managed the household, maintained cleanliness, comfort, and spoiled her beloved with delicious home-cooked meals. A year after the wedding, they welcomed a beautiful daughter who closely resembled her mommy. Victor cherished his princesses, striving to take care of them and fulfill their every wish. Several years later, many admired them in that very park, seeing a beautiful and close-knit family with 2 little ones. The couple happily strolled along the park's alley, perfectly complementing each other. The delicate, petite blonde mommy with her curly-haired, light-haired little one, and the tall, slender father resembling him, looking at each other with loving eyes. Their positive energy charged everyone around them. If you enjoyed the story, please support me with a thumbs up. And to stay updated on new interesting stories, subscribe and click the bell icon. Have a great day!